Coventry did go up, and so did Wolves, for whom Derek Dougan made a quite majestic debut in front of the cameras.
Thompson. Dougan. Goal.
Few names in Wolves' history carry the weight of Derek Dougan. He was the Doug, a towering centre-forward, a fearless leader, the kind of footballer who could change an entire match with one moment. When Derek Dougan stepped onto a pitch, defenders noticed. Teammates stood taller. Molineux believed. He was not simply one of Wolves' greatest players. He became one of the biggest personalities British football had ever seen. But greatness was only one part of his story, because wherever Dougan went, arguments followed. Managers questioned him. Football authority grew tired of him. Powerful people wished he would stay quiet. Derek Dougan never did. He challenged the way football worked. He challenged the people running it. He challenged anyone who believed players should simply obey. That courage earned him respect. It also created enemies who never truly forgave him. That was the strange thing about Derek Dougan. He could inspire a stadium. He could divide a dressing room. He could become your greatest teammate, or your biggest problem. That was the man football never fully understood. Before Wolves discovered one of their greatest heroes, before the European Nights, before the battles with football's most powerful men, before friendships were broken, and before controversy followed him for the rest of his life, one extraordinary decision revealed exactly who Derek Dougan really was. It was bold, it was dangerous, and it changed everything that followed. Subscribe, because legends like Derek Dougan deserve to be remembered for the complete truth behind their legacy, not just the headlines that followed them. Some footballers lose a final and move on. Derek Dougan lost something that followed him for years. Saturday, 7th of May, 1960, Wembley Stadium. FA Cup final day. Blackburn Rovers against Wolverhampton Wanderers. For Dougan, it should have been the biggest afternoon of his young career. But before the match began, the story changed. He asked Blackburn for a transfer. On the morning of the final, the timing shocked the club. Blackburn needed focus. Instead, their own centre-forward became the headline. Then the football began. Wolves won 3-0. Blackburn lost the cup, but Dougan lost something deeper: trust. From that day, football judged more than his ability. It judged his character. Years later, Dave Wagstaff remembered the label clearly. People had not written Dougan off as a footballer. They had written him off as a troublemaker. That word followed him everywhere. Managers heard it before they met him. Directors believed it before they signed him. Journalists repeated it whenever another argument appeared. Dougan never softened himself to escape it. If he wanted something, he said it. If he disagreed, he showed it. Football wanted obedient professionals. Derek Dougan was never built that way. Most clubs saw only risk. One club saw something bigger: a giant forward. A dangerous presence. A player worth the trouble. That club was Wolverhampton Wanderers, and that gamble would change Wolves forever. Wolves did not sign Derek Dougan as a safe choice. They signed a risk. By 1967, football already knew the stories, the transfer request, the arguments, the reputation. But Wolves looked past the noise. They saw the striker, the height, the power, the danger inside the box. Ronnie Allen believed other clubs had missed something, and Dougan proved him right quickly. His first home game at Molineux, against Hull City, the crowd wanted an answer. Was he finished? Was he trouble? Or was he exactly what Wolves needed? Dougan answered with goals. Not one, not two, a hat-trick. That was how the Doug introduced himself. No apology, no explanation, just 3 goals, and one stadium believing again. The reputation did not disappear. The problems did not vanish. But now Wolves had seen the other side, the side that made him worth the risk. Because when Derek Dougan was right, he was not just difficult, he was dangerous, and Molineux loved him for it. Derek Dougan gave Wolves presence. John Richards gave Wolves punishment. Together, they became a problem defenders could not solve. Dougan was the first battle. Tall, aggressive, awkward, loud. He pulled centre-halves into places they hated. He attacked crosses, challenged every ball, made defenders think about him, even before the pass arrived. Then Richards came alive. Sharper, quieter, more ruthless. Dougan created the chaos. Richards finished the damage. That was why the partnership worked. Derek Parkin also believed people got Dougan wrong. To outsiders, he looked arrogant, difficult, too outspoken. But inside Wolves, there was another side. A clever football mind. A man who understood the game. A man who made others better. And on the biggest nights, he became even stronger. Mike Bailey said the bigger the game, the better Dougan became. That was the difference. Pressure did not shrink him. It fed him. Europe proved it. Molineux felt it. Defenders feared it. And Peter Knowles once admitted he could never be the king at Wolves, while Derek Dougan was there. That tells the whole truth. The troublemaker label still followed him. But at Wolves, that trouble became power. Europe changed how Wolves saw Derek Dougan, because big players need big nights. And Dougan had them. In the early 70s, Wolves were no longer just fighting at home. They were travelling across Europe. Different stadiums, different pressure, different defenders. But Dougan carried the same presence. He did not look afraid of those nights. He looked made for them. Wolves reached the 1972 UEFA Cup final. Tottenham stood in their way. For Wolves, it was a chance at European history. For Dougan, it was another stage big enough for his personality. But football did not give him the ending. Wolves lost the final. The trophy slipped away. And one of the great chances of his career, became another wound. But Dougan did not disappear after that pain. He kept fighting, kept leading, kept making himself impossible to ignore. And 2 years later, Wembley gave him something back. 1974, League Cup final. Wolves against Manchester City. This time, the ending was different. Wolves won. Dougan finally had a major trophy in old gold. Not just applause, not just respect. Proof. The troublemaker had delivered. The rebel had won. The man managers found difficult. Had helped Wolves lift silverware. That is why his legacy is not simple. Because behind every argument, there was greatness. Behind every headline, there was a footballer who turned up when it mattered. Mike Bailey understood that part of him. The bigger the game, the more Derek Dougan seemed to rise. Europe showed it. Wembley confirmed it. And for Wolves fans, the Doug was no longer just a risk that worked. He was history. The hardest opponent Derek Dougan faced was not always a defender. Sometimes, it was his own body. By the mid-70s, the fire was still there. The voice was still there. The pride was still there. But the body that had carried him through battles started refusing him. Back injuries became a problem. Not a small one, a serious one. The kind that takes away rhythm, sharpness, confidence. The kind that makes every jump, every landing, every turn feel different. For a centre-forward like Dougan, that was cruel. His game was built on presence, on contact, on fighting centre-halves, on attacking the ball before anyone else dared. But now, the body that had made him dangerous was starting to limit him. In the 1974-75 season, he was restricted badly. Only a small number of appearances. The end was coming closer. And everyone around Wolves could feel it. This was not a quiet fading. This was a man losing the one place where everything about him made sense. On the pitch, his arguments had purpose. His arrogance had value. His voice had power. But when the body starts taking football away, even the loudest men become vulnerable. That was the pain. Derek Dougan had fought managers, fought defenders, fought authority. But this was different. There was no argument to win, no official to challenge, no headline to answer. Just a body slowly taking away the stage. And when his final Wolves appearance came, it carried the weight of an ending. Molineux knew. This was not just another match. This was goodbye to the Doug. The same man once called trouble was now leaving as a legend. And that is what made it hurt. Because Derek Dougan did not leave Wolves as a man who had run out of personality. He left because the body could no longer carry the fight. Leaving the pitch did not mean Derek Dougan stopped fighting. The fight simply changed shape. For most players of his generation, football was controlled from above. Managers gave orders. Directors made decisions. Clubs held power. Players were expected to stay grateful and stay quiet. Derek Dougan hated that. He believed footballers deserved more than applause on Saturday and control from everyone else on Monday. That is why his work with the PFA mattered. He was not just using his voice for himself. He was using it for players who had no voice. At that time, clubs still had frightening power over a player's future. Even when contracts ended, a player could still feel trapped. Dougan looked at that system and saw something wrong, so he challenged it. Again, he took on authority. Again, he made powerful people uncomfortable. Again, Gordon Taylor later remembered that Dougan was never afraid to take on authority. And that was exactly why he got into trouble. But trouble was the price. Because men like Dougan helped push football toward player freedom. Brendan Batson later said, players had once been treated like cattle. That word matters. Because it shows what Dougan was fighting against. Not just rules. A whole culture. A culture where clubs owned the power, and players carried the risk. Dougan refused to accept that. He had been called difficult before, but this time, being difficult had a purpose. He was not fighting for headlines. He was fighting for dignity, for movement, for respect, for the idea that footballers were not property. That is why his enemies grew, because football always praises rebels later, but hates them while they are winning the argument. Derek Dougan understood that better than most. He knew people would call him loud, arrogant, impossible, but he also knew silence would change nothing. So he kept speaking. And once again, the same thing happened. Football resisted him first. Then years later, football moved closer to the world he had been fighting for. That was the strange pattern of Derek Dougan's life. He was often too early, too loud, too difficult, but not always wrong. And that made him dangerous to every man who needed footballers to stay quiet. Derek Dougan fought more than football authority. He fought division. In 1973, Ireland was living through fear, violence, suspicion. North and South felt far apart. But Dougan believed football could do something brave. One team, one pitch, one impossible idea. Players from both sides of Ireland, together against Brazil. John Giles helped gather the Republic players. Dougan helped bring the Northern players. But even the name was a problem. The team could not simply be called Ireland, so they played as Shamrock Rovers 11. That told the whole story. The idea was powerful, but also dangerous. Dougan still played, and he scored. Against Brazil, the world champions. For one night, he stood inside the dream he believed in. But after that match, the dream disappeared, and Dougan believed something else disappeared with it. His Northern Ireland future. He never played for them again. That wound mattered, because this was not just selection. It was belonging. A man who had captained his country was left believing football punished him for trying to build a bridge. That is not a scar. A player easily forgets. Once again, Dougan had challenged something bigger than himself. Once again, he had been brave. And once again, he was left carrying the damage. Most football legends leave and never look back. Derek Dougan did. By 1982, Wolves were no longer chasing trophies. They were fighting to survive. Money problems, boardroom chaos, an uncertain future. Then Dougan returned. Not as the Doug, but as a man trying to save the club that had made him a legend. At first, it felt like the perfect ending. A Wolves hero, coming home when he was needed most. But football rarely writes perfect endings. The Batty brothers arrived. Hope quickly faded. The club kept falling. And before long, Dougan's name became linked with one of the darkest chapters in Wolves' history. That was the tragedy. He returned to rescue Wolves. Instead, his own legacy was wounded. Some supporters remembered the goals, the leadership, the unforgettable European nights. Others remembered the collapse, the boardroom, the questions that never disappeared. That divide stayed with him, because this was more than another club. This was Wolves. The place where Derek Dougan became the Doug. The place where he became immortal. Yet it also became the place where part of his legacy was hardest to explain. He fought for players. He challenged authority. He stood by what he believed. Even when it cost him friendships, peace, and the way some people remembered him. That is why Derek Dougan's story still matters. Not because it was perfect, but because it was honest. Subscribe, because legends like Derek Dougan deserve to be remembered for the complete truth, the greatness, the battles, the heartbreak, the sacrifices, and the legacy they left behind, not just the headlines that tried to define them.